there, Banditos. Welcome to another episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits. I'm Mike Farah, and we have yet another amazing guest for you today. His name is Michael Avon Oeming. You probably know him as an artist turned writer artist from such titles as The Mice Templar, Powers, where I first encountered his work. Bulletproof Monk. He wrote for some Marvel titles like Thor, Ares, Omega Flight. He did art for such titles as Judge Dredd, The Bastard Samurai, and recently Blue Book. And now he has a new miniseries out. It's called William of Newbury. The #1 issue just came out last week, I believe. And so you have more of that goodness to look forward to. And while you wait, you can listen to this interview. This is Michael Avon Oeming. Michael, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Michael.
It's a Michael on Michael interview. So always exciting when that happens. So we're going to kick you off with the question that we always ask first with all our guests, which is how and when did you first discover comic books?
I was lucky. I discovered comics pretty early. And when I just say discover, I mean like that I wanted to draw them. I wish I had discovered them like earlier as just a reader and stuff, right? But I was probably about 12 when I really discovered them. They'd been in my life once or twice. You read a comic here and there or something like that. But there was a sort of a initiating incident, an inciting incident where I moved to Texas when I was living in Jersey, and I moved to Texas and I couldn't assimilate and stuff. And I was like 11, 12 or so. And just locked myself in my room and started reading comics and started tracing comics and just became obsessed with the art and the process and the stories and the characters ever since. So I was just lucky to from like 12, 13 to know this is exactly what I wanted to do.
Do you remember some of the first characters or books that struck your interest?
I mean, Spider-Man, like one of the best characters ever, There were some issues. I should know the numbers by now or the specific issues. There were some Peter Parker Spectacular Spider-Man that Rich Buckler drew. And there was a guy called like the Prowler or something, had like a purple mask on his head. So those were some of the first ones. And I was kind of tracing that stuff and I was really into it, but it was definitely these two books, X-Men Annual 9 by Art Adams, where they go to Asgard.
Yes.
And then there was this follow-up, the New Mutants, #2. These are the only books that I can name, like numbers and stuff, right?
Sure.
Those two just blew my mind. They looked like nothing else in the stands. And I was like, this is it. I want to be this guy, Art Adams. I want to draw like this guy, Art Adams. And, he opened up my mind to not just what comics could be, but also like, all the mythology stuff is a big part of who I am and what I do. And I think it goes straight back to those books. So those were like my origin stories.
Do you have any of those beat up, traced over comics from
Not the originals
that heyday
anymore? A friend of mine, William Britton, did gift me with an X-Men Annual 9 again because like I just lose stuff over time and whatnot. And yeah.
some people have them, some people don't. Some people rats ate them in one case.
Well, I've gone through so many like moves and stuff. Like I got to a point where I'm not very nostalgic with things anymore. So
totally get it. So were you, it seems like that you discovered comics as a reader and a fan at the same time you thought about it almost as a vocation or career, or did that sort of come later? Like when did you think, okay, this is something I can do, or this is something I want to do for, my career?
I mean, kind of sort of right away. I just didn't know that there was, I could tell people were drawing these things, right? Like I didn't know that there was a path to go on anything. I just knew I wanted to draw the comics, so at first I can't say that like there was the idea of a job and a career. But then in Jersey at comic book stores, I met some people, right? And I realized, oh, it just clicked, I was like, oh, there is a path to this. Like, this is a thing, and it's not just that, because I was 12. So, I didn't have plans on anything other than sitting at home and drawing. And what was interesting was one of the people that I met was one town over where I lived was Adam Hughes. And he was working in a comic book store. He hadn't made it yet. And we struck up a friendship and stuff, and we're still good friends to this day. He's one of my oldest friends, and that was crazy to watch him go from drawing like Wolverine on a backing board to say, X-Men books, 2.99 each or something or whatever, to, his first jobs, and just watching him skyrocket. Like, it's one thing to know somebody who makes it. It's another to know somebody of his caliber and to watch that happen, is amazing. And yet somehow I still continue to draw.
We each follow our own paths, don't we?
Yeah, yeah. But so like he knew some more about the real comic scene than I did, and through him I met other people, and like so yeah, by the time I was 14, I got like my first published work. I was inking and sending out like inking samples to comic book companies, and somebody hired me foolishly, and so I got like my first inking job at like 14 because I was just that focused, that focused early on.
Well, so I was going to ask you, it seems like this just flows together, from discovering comic books to starting to want to make them to your break into the industry.
Yeah.
What was so you started inking rather early. Where was the break for full illustration?
Um, It's like my first comics gig. Like they were like my first drawing comics gigs were these really independent small comics that were a lot of them were sex parodies, like porn parodies, like well, by Moby Dick we didn't have to change the name on, but like we did like
Yeah.
Dr. Hooters and just ridiculous fun stuff, right? I mean it was porn parody stuff, and it was just all goofy. But one of the reasons we did those was like you just knew you'd get enough orders for them, because way back in the day, you would blind solicit things, not knowing if they would go to print. You didn't know if you'd get enough orders to print. So there was a lot of these like rock and roll comics or biography comics and a lot of the porn parody stuff. It was safe to get published in black and white that way. So those are some of my first stories that I had published. Those got me some attention at DC. And I started both inking and doing little drawing jobs there. But it was all through just force of sheer will. Like I did nothing else. I think in high school I did some sports, like I played football and I wrestled in my freshman year. And after that, I felt it was too much of a distraction from drawing. I felt school was too much of a distraction from drawing. So I was staying up late at night, having trouble getting up in the morning, cutting class to sleep in, because I've been up till 3 in the morning just drawing and trying to figure stuff out. In fact, I never finished high school. Like I just completely focused on what I was doing, to the point that I got kicked out. Basically, I was kicked out for non-attendance. And I was mad because I was still passing, not well, but I was passing, and I was like, who cares if I'm there if I'm, I get it all now, but at the time I didn't, right? And I basically gave myself that summer. If I wasn't getting published by something regular, then I have to just suck it up and go back. But that's when I got my first regular inking work, which was on Child's Play for this company called Innovation. And one of my first jobs was over Derek Robertson, who we know from The Boys and
Sure.
all of his other amazing work and stuff. And it's neat. And then another neat story that we kind of came up together with some of our first works.
This is all amazing. It's an amazing sort of origin story. You in the zone from the very beginning in drawing. I've heard of worse excuses for not going to school and getting kicked out. So
I saved all that for
drawing,
my 30s, and I went through
yeah,
a period of
yeah,
my 30s where I did a lot of drinking and hanging out,
right.
partying.
Okay,
But
so
like
it was
up to then, yeah, I sacrificed
delayed.
I didn't even see it as a sacrifice. I just didn't want to do anything else.
Well, you were
Uh,
single-minded and you were focused
yeah,
on what you wanted to do, which is
yeah,
great to have discovered that so early, because I think a lot of people, myself included, you sort of kind of whittle away, go this way, that way, and
yeah,
don't really start to focus until your
yeah.
20s, late 20s
But
even.
you'd think if I was that focused that early of an age, that I'd be a much better artist than I am. And I'm not putting myself
Oh,
down,
come on.
but like I do fine, right? But like there's a new project I'm getting on where I draw a lot of a donkey. And like I still struggle with like animals, even though I'm doing an anthropomorphic book, but like drawing horses and stuff, they all look like weird dogs. And I'm like, I've been doing this for 30 something years. Like I should know how to
I've
I don't
heard
know. It's
horses
funny.
are
It's
the
just funny
hardest
to
thing
me.
to draw, actually. Someone
Yeah,
else told me
no,
that,
but growing up with Adam, again, I remember one day we were hanging out and he was going to go play D&D that night with some friends. And he just whipped out a horse. He just drew a horse. And he goes, "Oh, look, I did this without any reference even." Son of a bitch. He was like 18 at the time or something. I don't know. And
Good
I'm
thing we
still
weren't
like,
competitive at all.
how many knuckles in a horse's leg? I don't know.
So you referenced this early on. You don't seem to be and weren't back then much of a superhero guy, even though, of course, you sort of discovered comics through superhero, which is, most of what was out there. But, Powers is an obvious exception. We'll get to that. But was it a conscious decision in the books you were taking early on to somewhat avoid going down the superhero route? Because I'm looking at some of your early, more, I guess you would call mainstream work, like Judge Dredd, Atomic Robo, Bastard Samurai. They're skirting around adventure and action and
Yeah.
things like that, but they're not, straight on superhero work.
I don't think I consciously was. One of the reasons like Marvel and DC is already doing that stuff so great. And it's not until recent times, like 10, 15 years. But back then, like in the early 2000s and stuff, like there wasn't a lot, and when you think about it, there wasn't tons of superhero comics coming from the indie side, and if you're at Image, it's different if you're, Rob and Jim Lee and all those guys. But everybody else was coming out with different stuff because you already kind of had the top performers of superhero work making those things, and they're huge hits. So like I think a lot of us gravitated to other sorts of genre. So it wasn't a conscious choice. Although when I look back, I realized that most of the things that I've been interested in, that I created for myself, was non-superhero stuff. One of my favorite things that I've done myself in my career was this book called The Victories, which was an all superhero thing. So it's not like I'm averse to it. I like it. It's in my wheelhouse. But it's just not. There's so many different things I'm interested in, from biography to journalistic comics, some of which we're dabbling in now with Blue Book, supernatural stuff, and I like weird things that are based on true facts, and I would do some more superhero stuff again for sure. But yeah, it's not like it's not the tip of the spear kind of thing, right?
Right. Yeah, so you're more omnivorous in terms of, the kind of
Yeah.
genres and stories that you like. And so you just happen to kind of take this route, which seems like in retrospect sort of going around superheroes, but it wasn't a conscious choice.
Yeah, and some of it was just I'm being honest again about my work. Like it's always just been off. And I don't mean off as in bad, it's left of center, right? So like it didn't really lend itself to superhero stuff. But that's why like early on Judge Dredd worked out. But I don't know that I would have fit well with my weird style that's part cartoony, part straightforward, part abstract, doing that with like X-Men or something like that. I'm
Right.
sure individual people would really enjoy it, but it's probably not what the crowds want.
Got it. So let's talk a little bit about your early work. And so you had these, porn parodies, and then eventually some inking, and
Yeah.
then you got into, I named off some of those, Judge Dredd, which you talked about a little bit. Bluntman Chronic was eventually one of your
Yeah, so
early
much
things.
fun.
What did you learn in that early work that about your style and working in the industry? What did you have to sort of work out before you felt like you're like, you may not even feel like that now, but you're sort of confident and you're,
Yeah.
going forward, you know what to do.
I just learned how to make the donuts. I learned the process. I learned a work ethic. I learned how to meet deadlines. Adam would lovingly say, I learned to draw fast first and good later. Because unless you're a huge talent, like you can't be late on stuff, right? And there's a whole work ethic and a process that you just have to meet. I get kind of bent out of shape when the rare times I bump into somebody who's not in the same wavelength as I am when we're working, because I'm a workaholic. It is like the work itself is so important to me. My whole life and sense of self-worth comes from it. Even through the stuff that's not successful, just the act of doing it. And early on, a lot of that stuff was like there's a sort of parable or saying about like a pot maker who taught some students, and he was like, here's some clay, and we want you to make the best clay pot that you can. And then to the other students, they were like, here's a whole bunch of clay, make me 40 pots today, or something like that, right? And like the people who had all the time in the world didn't end up making pots as good as the people who were just, they were churning it out because they're making it so much, they built up so much experience that by the end they could quickly do a beautiful pot. And I think that's what comics are like. Like I think the more you do, the more disciplined you are about it, the better they'll become. Because so much of it isn't about the drawing. Like really understanding storytelling took a long, long time. Really understanding how to make your characters act and emote, how to pick up subtext from the writer's script and bring that out into the characters. That all takes a lot of time. Takes life experience as well, you know. So it's just making the donuts over long periods of time is you know, and you got to stick it out through the good and the bad. The bad for me, like there was a time where I lost my career, to be honest. Like, and it was just the industry had collapsed, you know, jobs like just went away. That's when I ended up working in a parking lot as a security guard, and I was still drawing comics, you know. But all those experiences, like learning how editors work, learning how important it is to communicate with your editors, learning how important it is to communicate with everybody in your team, that this is a collaboration, that you're working with other people. That was all a part of that process, and it's my favorite part in a weird way.
You feel like there, or can you look back and find an inflection point where you felt that things were now clicking? You're always learning, obviously, but things are
Yeah.
now clicking. I've sort of learned about storytelling, facial expressions, picking up the cues from the scripts, things like that, that you felt like, okay, I've got really a good sense of the basics, and now I'm ready to sort of push beyond that.
I think it was Powers. Because Powers happened right during that break that I was talking about.
Okay.
So my trajectory was doing a bunch of indie comics, small jobs for Marvel and DC. I inked some Daredevil when I was like 19 over Tony Daniels at Daredevil Fall from Grace. Worked on a graphic novel that never came out at DC, at like their beautiful Piranha Press, it was called.
Mhm.
Um, Eventually I got that Judge Dredd job, which I wasn't ready for, you know, that so I was penciling and inking Judge Dredd monthly. I wasn't really ready for the job. I didn't have that mental part yet. You know, I didn't know how to like keep the quality up, keep the work up, you know, how to work past being burnt out, or how to work without inspiration, you know, like to just do the work that comes in later. Um, the first early work that I'm still really proud of is Foot Soldiers with Jim Kruger at Dark Horse. Like I could still look at that and go, oh, really happy with this. Shortly after that, did a create your own series with Brian Glass called Ship of Fools, which was our first real dipping into creator own stuff. And because it was all completely just us, I learned a lot there. And then there was this break that happened. It's not that I stopped making comics, it's just that I stopped having jobs. So there was like a year where I was working at this auto dealer. It was the first job in my life. Like I had a job earlier as a kid. I was delivering pizza for a little bit, but you know, this is my first quote real job. And I'm just in, and I made sure to get something that I could draw at. So then I felt like a security guard. A security guard can always draw. But at that point, like everything started really coming together. And then working with Brian, who had kind of gone through a similar journey. Like he had done a bunch, Brian Bendis, he had done a bunch of indie books that he wrote and drew. So he learned a lot of stuff, learned from his mistakes. So we had kind of both got to that place where we had talent, but we're fumbling over ourselves. And then we had this opportunity to do something new, and that's where everything just clicked. Like all the goodness came together, all the lessons paid off. And even though when I look back, like the drawings are still like wobbly, or you know, they got better over time and more consistent. I could tell I had the ideas. I knew what I was doing mentally and stuff. So that's really when it finally came together.
That makes a lot of sense. I want to dive more into sort of your collaborations, because you've talked already about a number of folks that you've collaborated with multiple times and for a long time, and that are, you know, you call friends.
Yeah.
Um, But since we're on powers, we might as well just
Yeah.
plow through. Um, can you tell me a little bit more about how the actual project came about? We know where you are sort of in your trajectory, but was it something? So did you know Brian Bendis before Powers, and did he bring the idea to you, or was it sort of brokered by Image in some way or someone else?
Um, I met Brian at a small comic book store. There was like a signing at this place called Claude's Comics, someplace in Philadelphia. And him and David Mack were there. So I met them both at the same time for the first time. They had already been really tight friends. And it was just kismet. Like we all just clicked right away. And like that, the day after I started faxing, because this is back in the 90s, I started faxing both him and David Mack characters in this new style I was trying out, which was basically the Batman animated style, the Bruce Timm kind of stuff. Because when I started working uh, at the car dealership, my son had been born at the same time. So I just had so much less time. And up until that point, my career, I'd wanted to be kind of like a Michael Golden, Kevin Nolan, Art Adams, like heavy detail line stuff. And I was trying to get some work anywhere. And at the time, we all loved the Batman adventure books. So I was trying out a style, and I couldn't really hit the style. I was close, but I couldn't really hit it. But I started to discover my own version of that. This simple, bold, heavy blacks and stuff. So it was just developing that right when I met Brian and David. And I was impressed with what they're doing creator-owned comics. I didn't really understand creator-owned comics then. Like to me, the word before that was self-publishing. But I didn't know there was a real difference in these things. So seeing what they were doing, as soon as I was done with Ship of Fools, um, even before that, we just said, I want to work with you, and I saw the books he's doing, like AK Goldfish and these cool crime books, right? And I wanted to switch from all the heavy genre stuff that I'm doing that was superhero and science fiction to like, a crime noir book. So he said, oh, I got this idea. So he sends me the faxes again, right? And this thing called Powers coming up. I'm like, oh man, it's like superheroes, right? And he's like, no, 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 you'll barely see the superheroes in this. This is all from the ground looking up. So when they come in, it'll be these special moments and stuff. All right, I get it, I get it. And like I drew the first 2 or 3 issues in a phone booth at that security job. No, it wasn't really a phone booth, but it's a phone booth shaped where there's a little
Right.
desk in there, right? And I worked on those in there. We were crazy enough to want to try it in color at Image. And these were early days at Image where Jim Valentino had been the one to really open up the doors for everybody else. And he had an eye on both Brian and I and gave us these opportunities. He saw behind the scenes that we got good, like a good distribution, that like he
Mhm.
just worked the retailers. Like we didn't know how to do that stuff. He knew how to talk to the retailers and stuff. So we did see our issues. We expected our numbers to go down after issue 3. Well, we're getting ready to go to black and white. But instead they went up, and then they kept going up. Then by issue 4, 3 or 4, I was out of the guard shack because the checks were paying more than minimum wage part-time job. And yeah, and it started from there, and it was an upward trajectory, which was kind of unheard of. It rarely ever happens.
Did you get any sense that was going to happen from those first few issues, from those first few scripts where you're like, this is something special? And how could you know it would go on for years and years
No,
and years, but still.
I mean, really, no, because quality isn't why things take off, right? They take off because they hit a social tickle of some kind, right? Like it has to be all about timing and stuff. So it's not just the quality. We've seen plenty of quality books come along that just don't connect at that time. And it has nothing to do with how good the art or the writing is. People will like it for sure, and it'll get praised, but if it's not the right timing, like we came out with Powers now, I don't think anybody would care. Like we were saying things about superheroes at the right time.
Mhm.
If you come out with I don't want to call it anti-superhero, but you come out with like a deconstructionist superhero tale now, like it's got to be really good and really new and find a completely different thing that has been being said for the past 20 years, because it's all been said a whole lot. But at the time, there were very few books that were doing that. So there was sort of a combination of stuff happening. Some of it's luck and timing. Part of that luck and timing was that Brian was also starting to take off as a writer at Marvel. So, or just before Marvel, he was doing like Sam and Twitch with Todd McFarlane.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so that you had these things happening in conjunction. It was good timing for the commentary that the comic was making. It looked different. And Brian's career was taking off in different ways that would support the book at the same time. So, when I see people struggling, this is a story I try to tell them all the time. Like, it's like whether your book is successful or not has almost nothing to do with the actual work itself. More to do with the timing. I mean, the quality has to be there, but it's not enough, unfortunately, right? Otherwise, we'd all be doing well.
It's true. I mean, I always humble myself and I guess others by always bringing up the role of luck. How under appreciated luck is in terms of someone's career, in terms of the work's legacy, all that kind of thing. It does play a rather large role because you kind of look across the comics landscape and there's a lot of good work. And there are a lot of good creators, and some hit and some don't. And, sometimes it's just a flip of the coin.
For sure.
But I'm glad it got you out of that guard shack and you got the good flip of the coin. As well as, obviously amazing work from you and Brian. When you look back on, and I know it's still possibly a going concern or kind of recurring project, but when you look back at sort of the initial run, is there a peak for you in there as far as a storyline maybe that sticks out more than others?
I think my favorite storyline is probably weirdly the Forever arc, which is where we went through these different time periods. And that's weird because it's not like it ends in modern time with Powers, with Walker and Dina and stuff. And Dina's kind of the secret star of the book. But it was really fun at that point. Like we had done the format of the book for so long. Stay down on the street with the superheroes. We weren't really getting into superhero view very much. And then it was time to just break off and do something really crazy. And like that first issue, there's like monkeys having sex and stuff. It was like early Mankind, like 2001 stuff. It was called the monkey fucking issue. And we lost like, I don't know, like 500 numbers. Like our numbers like went down like 500 or something like that immediately after that. I was like, all right, well, we got rid of the people who weren't that interested. They were just hanging on, right?
The Puritans.
So that was really fun. There was a story called FG3 that I really liked a lot, about these government engineered superheroes. And those were some big moments, for sure. It all happened in such a blur, like sort of the core best of Powers in some ways, not in all ways. Like they felt like they were happening between 2001 to 2005, something like that. Like, this is where the newest stories were, where we got to explore things for the first time. And even style-wise, I look back sometimes and like, what was I using? Was this a brush? Was this a pen? And why am I not doing that now? And always get filled with self-doubts. I'm like, why can't I draw as good as I used to? And I just feel like that about everything. So it's hard to be a judge about that kind of thing. But there's a lot of stuff later that I really, really enjoy doing. So it's hard to say what the very favorite thing is. Because even in that Forever storyline, I didn't get to draw a lot of Powers of Walker running around in a suit and stuff like that. That's still some of my favorite stuff.
Yeah, they're all your babies. It's hard to pick. It's hard to pick a favorite. So Powers eventually got some attention for adaptation purposes, but before that, and you could tell me about the chronology. You also had one of your I think early comics, Bulletproof Monk, which was adapted into a movie. Was Bulletproof Monk a creator owned endeavor?
Creator
not
owned,
really.
but Brett Lewis and I basically created it. Like we didn't own it. There was a concept brought to us by the publisher. And they
Okay.
had the name already, the name, which was, I believe, created by Mark Paniccia, who's an editor at Marvel for a long
Hmm.
time now. Great title, kind of sold itself. And I just knew they would do like this martial arts thing.
Yeah.
And Brett and I kind of came up with the rest, if my memory is correct. Um, so like we didn't own or anything like that, but it was a really good job and it paid well at the time, and then it was exciting to see it turn into a film and go, and it was, produced by John Woo and had China Fat in it and stuff. And it was just really cool. It was a good experience. I can't complain about.
Good, good. In the film, did you feel like they pulled through any of your kind of artistic choices at all,
Yeah,
or are
the
they
the, the
really
film
kind of,
was like a stepping stone to its own thing.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So let's move a little fast forward a little bit. I mean, you're still doing powers, of course, but um, since the early 2000s, you had moved, maybe not moved, but added to your sort of artistic repertoire by doing more writing projects, right?
Yeah.
Um, was that a plan somewhere from the beginning? Was that like a kernel of an idea in the back of your head, or were you really an artist up until you were given an assignment or you thought about something and you're like, oh, wait a second, I want to write this?
I think it came through like I had always had ideas for stories, and like I always felt like I can't write. There's people who study writing and stuff, but just I had just been adjacent to writing for so long, and coming up with ideas with other writers for stories. And eventually, I think it was during that time period when I was in the parking lot, I came up with a couple of things for myself. One was called Hammer of the Gods, which I eventually involved Mark Wheatley, a writer and an amazing creator in his own right. Has a great history. He's super smart. I love the guy. I invited him on anyway because I was still just too not sure about my own stuff. But I had written like a pretty tight outline for the first storyline. And my Templar was something I came up with there while I was in the thing. And again, I came up with this tight outline, invited my buddy Brian Glass, who then, really, really expanded it, made it his own as well. So like I was already kind of there. Um, and I'm not exactly sure when it was. I think it had to do with yeah, and then after that, I did a couple other creator-owned stuff. So one of them was called Parliament of Justice, which is the very first thing that I wrote on my own, which is why it was all done in captions with no dialogue, because I was so afraid of like uh dialogue and stuff. But I've been co-writing stuff like The Cross Bronx with Ivan Brandon. Bastard Samurai plotted, but it was written by Miles Gunter. But I had started with Parliament, writing my own thing, and one or two other small comics that I was writing myself, having other people draw as one shots. And then I got an offer from Dynamic Forces to write Red Sonja with Mike Carey. So I wrote with Mike Carey the first 5 issues, and then after that, I wrote it for like another year or something on my own. And then from there, it went to Thor at Marvel. Maybe Thor was first. I'm not sure, but that's
And
sort of the path. Yeah.
so it sounds like, a theme maybe of your career, but it's certainly of your writing career is collaboration, right? So
Yeah.
those early sort of co-writing gigs were those like training wheels for you? Did you feel like,
Yeah. They
having that sort of support allowed you to then
a hundred
go
percent.
free after that?
Yeah, I didn't have the confidence to just go out on my own. When I did, there were these little one shots that were sort of these individual concepts. Um, so, which is advice we give to a lot of writers, like start out small. Don't start out with a giant, 12 issue thing. Like do a short story. And basically
Right.
that's how I started out with. Um, uh, yeah, now I really, really enjoy writing. I took a break for a little bit. Um, because I think the trajectory I was on for a while was I thought I was going to do a lot more writing at Marvel and DC. And I just had trouble keeping up with the Marvels, uh, like all the crossover stuff.
Mhm.
I couldn't keep up with the characters. I couldn't keep up with. My mind just wasn't built that way, and that's not as a criticism, because obviously I worked with Brian Bendis and others who are really good at seeing that whole big picture. but I always wanted to go smaller. Street level heroes were sort of my favorite, or the mythology stuff, which is really big, but also sort of outside of the continuity of Marvel and DC.
Yeah.
And then the past, uh, how many years? I don't know, maybe 10 years, I started really, really getting back into writing. And now it's one of my favorite things. And a lot of my projects is just going to be me writing. And now I've learned how to color and I've learned how to letter. Um, so yeah, that might be what's next. And I'll just be writing, coloring, and doing everything myself.
Yeah, the one-man band. You can do it, definitely do it now, with the
The technology makes it
technology
so much
and
easier.
yeah, even just learning, having the
Mhm.
technology, having YouTube, having whatever to learn these crafts is
Yeah.
very empowering. So I want to unpack some of what you said. First of all, the some of the work you did at Marvel, because it was from looking at your bibliography, it was a lot with Thor and the
Yeah.
Thor corner of the universe, which seems to sort of jibe with your, interest in mythology. Did Thor come to you, or did you express interest in doing that work?
I think Brian suggested me, Brian Bendis.
Okay,
Like at the time they knew they were going to bring an end to Thor. They weren't ready to restart it yet. But like they just knew they're going to end it. And so it was kind of like they could do like a stunt thing, right? Like this, like not a throwaway thing, but like who would be interesting to just write an arc? Like we don't have to worry about where it goes, right? So Brian suggested me, and because of Hammer of the Gods, I had the Hammer of the Gods work, so
right.
they could see that like I had my head wrapped around this stuff. So I got to do Thor Ragnarok, and after that, I did a couple of other Thor things, and Omega Flight, which was really difficult because it was basically Alpha Flight, but we're calling it Omega Flight because it's after they died. So this is like their last chance. And it started as an ongoing series, but switched to a mini series, which that was my first experience with that kind of thing, and that was really tough. And Ares, which is something I'm still super proud of, was a lot of fun. So yeah, I had a really good time working there and doing writing for them.
Yeah, until the crossovers, which has failed many a creator.
Yeah, I'm not the only one
I
taken
don't
out by
think you're the
that.
only one. Those are tough.
Yeah,
So returning to again the theme of collaboration, you've mentioned a couple times. Well, you've had a number of longtime collaborators, uh, two of which named Brian.
yeah.
So I can just ask this question as what makes for a good collaboration or a good collaboration with a Brian in this case.
Yeah.
So Brian Glass and Brian Bendis are the ones I'm obviously referring to, but
You want good communication, and a big part of that communication is a lack of ego, you know. So it's like, what is best for the story? It's not about what your particular story fetish is, or what you're obsessed with doing, or your ideas somehow being attached to you as a person. Like you want to be able to do something that facilitates the story, that the best way to tell it. I think both Brian Bendis and I work seamlessly, egolessly together. There are arcs of powers that I wrote. I didn't write the dialogue. I wrote some of the dialogue, and then Brian would come in and do his own thing, and he'd mix pages up and stuff like that. And it's just this. It's just always it's by us, the story and art, right? Because it's not like I don't need to say I wrote these particular issues. Like we talk about it. It's not a secret. But like that's how little ego that there is involved in there. When Brian Glass and I work together, um, because I have more of an established name with with Brian Glass, I always wanted to be clear what he's done so that I'm not somehow accidentally stealing any credit for his ideas. So
mhm.
again, you push the ego aside. It's not just what's best for the book, but what's best for your partner. Um, so I mean that's a big part of communication. Like when we say communication, people think it's just about like responding to emails or phone calls and stuff, but it's much deeper than that. My wife and I, Taki Soma, we work together in a very egoless way. Um, and it's always what's best for the story. So that's why I suggest whenever I do work outside of that, every now and then I'll work with somebody else that is on a different wavelength, and I go like, huh, I'm not sure what to do here. It feels like somebody changed the rhythm in the music, and you're just like, okay, I'm still dancing, but what? Okay.
Yeah. Record scratch.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I get that. I think that makes a lot of sense. You know, I guess a lot of it's nonverbal, right? You think, like you were saying, a lot of people say communication, and you think, oh, they're talking on the phone, they're actually hashing things out. But I would imagine a lot of it is your reaction or your extension of what the other person has done, and
Yeah.
then that person being able to react to that and build on that as well. But that doesn't have to be, you don't have to externalize that in order for that to be the
100%.
communication.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like improv, it's that
Right.
yes, anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
Brian Bendis talks about this all the time, but Brian Glass and I do it too.
Yeah.
During my Templar, I remember drawing this one character and I drew like this sort of iron hand on him. And you just saw this iron hand and he went nuts and like just expanded this character's whole thing and stuff. Um, so like we'll play off of each other's ideas. Bendis will take dialogue out, like I'll write stuff and he feels that I've so clearly expressed what the character is thinking and feeling that he just takes the dialogue away. And at first I was like, why are you doing that? Like that's why I did that. And he was like, no, you did a great job at expressing why this thing was. So like instead of adding like, oh look, there's room back there where I could put some fancy words, Brian's like, no, take it out. Again, whatever's best for the work.
As you're moving towards more projects with that you feel like you can basically do by yourself, or at least do, the story, the writing, the art, whatever else, maybe the coloring, the lettering, everything else.
Yeah.
Do you find that you miss being collaborative with somebody and being
For
able to
sure.
push
So
things along that way?
I just
Yeah.
finished, well, I finished a little while ago. The next thing coming out from Dark Horse Comics is called William of Newbury. So this is an anthropomorphic book that's set place in during medieval period, and it's based on a true story, these true stories that these medieval monk had written about. Of course, it's like zombies and revenants and stuff, but he said it happened, so true story. But yeah, and writing and drawing it, like the only person I really had, like Taki would give me some feedback on the scripts, the editor would give me some feedback, but most of the time I'm just working by myself. And I did miss working with somebody else. Now luckily again, because Taki's her own writer and an artist, like she can give me feedback when I need it, but yeah, it's different than that energy I get working with the Bryans.
I get it. So you've mentioned it a few times, and I just wanted to dig a little bit into Mice Templar because I think it's a really fascinating and unique work. Could you tell us a little bit more about how that came about? Obviously it was an idea, I think you had mentioned, that came out of this this period of time when you were not
Yeah.
producing anything, although you were actually making stuff. But how did that where did the idea come from, and
Yeah.
then how did that expand into the story we know now?
I kind of joke that most of my ideas come from like 4 or 5 films that I saw as a kid, and it just stuck with me. It's like Time Bandits, Highlander, Star Wars, the original Hobbit cartoon, and there's 1 or 2 others, but it's basically those. And like, well, Secret of Nim was one of them. And the Secret of Nim is this children's story, but it's got a seriousness to it, a matureness to it. I hate kids movies or cartoons that talk down to kids. I mean, there's a place for that. There's a place for that kind of like very simpleton, funny, cute stuff. But I think you can have that and speak to children like they're human beings. And Secret of Nim did that for me. And there were just these cool scenes of like this mystical stuff, and there was a sword fight scene at the end, and it just always stuck in my head. So there was I basically just took that, and Lord of the Rings was, I think Lord of the Rings was coming out, the films where we're just getting our first hints at that. So those things on my mind, like my son was like 3 or 4, so I saw Secret of Nim DVD and I got that, and it was sort of this thing of Secret of Nim and Lord of the Rings just falling into my head. I actually wasn't really even aware of like Redwall until a little bit later. And I mentioned Redwall because that's kind of one of the leaders in this particular subgenre of 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 the anthropomorphic thing and stuff. It's kind of the king
Yeah.
of it. Um, yeah, and that's kind of where it started, and I had planned it as a 6 issue miniseries, and then I realized that the world felt bigger than what I knew how to build. And Brian Glass had always been, I met him through a Dungeons and Dragons group. So he was always good at building worlds,
Hmm.
right? So it's like, and we had worked together before on our first created own thing called like a Woman and Spandex Girl or Spandex Tights, which was really fun. And so I was looking forward to working with him again. And yeah, asked him on board. We went to go to Robert McKee writing seminar. And that's kind of where it all started. And we all started talking about that and it all came together. And yeah, it's still one of my favorite things in the world. I'm hoping like William of Newbury is successful enough that we can even, revisit my Templar in some way.
That would be great. Um, they definitely sound, now that you mentioned kind of those four key influences, I am starting to like connect them back to
Oh
everything
yeah, I
you've
mean
done,
Highlanders,
and it
Master
does.
Samurai,
Right. It does like map on very, very well. And I
Yeah.
love Secret of Nim when I was a kid,
Oh my
actually. I could not, if you had asked me to sort of produce a name, or
God.
what it was about or anything like that, but once you said Secret of Nim and you said, yeah, it's about this one, and what you said also about this seriousness and not talking down to kids, I mean, that's like
Yeah.
kind of a like a survival,
Yeah.
tale,
Because
right? And
Brinley like had to save her kid who was dying of like pneumonia. And at the
right,
same time, like the farming thing was happening. So like they were going to basically
get
reap the
what,
whole field that their farm
right.
was, but she had to go get medicine for her kid to so she could move him and stuff. Like had to go to this owl, and the owl was so scary, and he's like
Yeah,
standing on
yeah.
the bones of other mice when he's talking to her to give her like, oh my God, it was so
It's
great.
harrowing.
Yeah. Yeah, and then there was that sword fight at the end. And that was it,
Yeah,
man.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, you could do much worse for influences for a
Yeah.
career in comics. I think those all work. So we've covered a lot of ground, but there's a lot of ground, we can't do everything in the interview, but I'd love to know, within your bibliography, things that we maybe haven't mentioned. Is there a project in there that you're especially proud of that you think deserves more attention that is maybe not, at the level of Powers per se, or some of your other well-known works?
I, you know, I did a book with Taki called Synergy that we're really, really proud of. Uh, that was out through Image. That's something worth, checking out. And it was about like monster hunters, but all the monster hunters were redheaded. Like it was almost like this bloodline that goes through, and all the monsters were kind of based on various types of sin and feeding off of people's sins and stuff. That was a lot of fun. Um, and my book, The Victories, I'm really proud of that I did at Dark Horse. I took all the conspiracy stuff the fringy conspiracy stuff that I've enjoyed, and then mixed it into this dark superhero thing. And I wrote and drew it all myself. Nick Filardi did the colors, and that's through Dark Horse. You can get uh, a collection of that, the omnibus.
And sort of the flip side of that, because oftentimes when we ask that question, everybody rightfully kind of goes to a lot of stuff that they have created from themselves. But first of all, are you open to working on, established characters
Oh yeah.
again? And if so, what are ones that you maybe have not had the opportunity to take a crack on that you're,
Well,
foaming at
recently
the mouth for?
recently in the last couple of years, I got to work on Dick Tracy, which I wrote and drew. I had such a blast on that. Um, I worked on Cave Carson at Dark Horse. I mean, at DC. That was a lot of fun. It was an old established character. I had done a little bit of Superman. I did a short Superman story with Brian Glass, and I wrote and drew a short Batman story. Um, Established characters now that I'm working on. I'm working on some BPRD stuff. So those are all established characters. I'm
Yeah, for
currently
sure.
working on that. And I do have I have one Batman story in me. Um, that I'm waiting for the right time to pitch. So yeah, I mean, I'm still excited to do other characters and stuff.
Yeah.
I'd like to return to Thor, even kind of pick up where I
Okay.
left off.
Okay.
Um, which is funny because like I never planned on doing more Thor, but there are so many people who are such hardcore fans of that. They keep asking me questions that I don't have answers to because it's been so long. But it got me thinking. So now I've got some ideas and stuff. But um, yeah, so I would do that stuff again.
Nice. Okay. Sounds good. You have a nice mix. I'm sure you always have ideas percolating for your own stuff,
I
but
have too many. There's not enough time in the day. And they're not, and like when I said it, I don't mean like they're all genius and stuff. That I just want to do them, you
yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
later on I'll decide if they were good or not, or whether they're worth doing or not. But again, like making the donuts, it's in the doing, it's in the making. You know,
Right.
that's the thing that excites me.
Yeah. You don't want to start a factory like Andy Warhol, like an art factory.
No, I don't want to. Yeah, I want to. Yeah, I don't want to do like an AI thing and just fart out a bunch of crap. But
Crank them
I want to
out.
take
Yeah.
time to do it and let it fail or succeed on its own.
Right. Um, well, Michael, thank you so much for taking the time for this interview. We got a couple more questions. I'd love to know,
Please go
first of all, what you're working on now, what we can expect from the future.
Main couple things I'm working on now is Murder Inc. with Brian Bendis and Taki. That's coming out through Dark Horse Comics. That is a alternate reality mobster story, and we've just been optioned at Amazon. So it's
Nice.
under development. We'll see how far it goes and stuff, but it all looks good, and we've got some exciting people attached to it. I've been working on Blue Book for a little while with James Tinian. These are all at Dark Horse right now, actually, so
Mhm.
makes it easy. So James Tinian and I have been doing Blue Book, which is all about UFO investigations, the history of UFOs. One of the things that's interesting about that is how history repeats itself. So there's a lot of stories in there about UFO hearings and like the divulging of information and walking back of information and disinformation. So like even if you're not into aliens and that kind of thing, there's a sort of a military and intelligence history there that's super interesting. We have a volume of that's already out that's about Betty and Barney Hill, who's like the first Americans to have an abduction that was recorded. And then 1947 is an extension of that, and that's out now, the first two issues through Dark Horse. And then the next big thing coming is William of Newbury, which I'm
Yep.
super excited about. I've got a bunch of sort of rules sets William of Newbury apart from Mice Templar. Like I wanted to be careful to like just not retread any of that, and to find my own take on it. And I think I found a really interesting voice for the series. The first issue is out in May, and it's not a kid's book, but anybody of any age can read it. I would say it's akin to Hellboy, like most of my influences are. Um, and it's really fun and spooky, and yeah, super excited about it. That I love the characters. I think it's the best thing that I've written. It's the best thing that I've done. Because usually I have to make a caveat to my friends about like, oh, I was in a dark place when I wrote this, or something or we ran out of space or something. Like this feels like exactly what I set out to do. So I'm really, really happy with it. I hope people will pick it up because I'd like to do a lot more. I like it to be like a yearly thing, to do a mini series every year of William of Newbury.
That sounds great. I mean, that sounds really fulfilling.
It
To
is.
feel like you're just proud without conditions of
It's the
something you're
best
putting out.
feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'm highly critical of myself. So it feels good to be like, yeah, okay,
I will tell you,
what's
you're not
small,
the only one.
I'm actually happy with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That actually brought up a quick other question before we close out, which is, do you ever foresee a time where you would concentrate on either art or writing to the complete exclusion of the other, or are you now, Renaissance man, you'll always do some writing, you're always going to do some art, and that's just, part of being the creator that you are?
Health reasons is the only reasons I could think why I would only switch over to art. I mean, to writing.
Yeah.
Whether it's my eyes giving me problems or hands or something like that.
Right.
My goals to, die at the art table.
Good goal.
Yeah, but
You
I
can
mean,
do it,
it
but
does feel
hopefully a
really
long
good.
time from now.
It does fulfill me to know that like if if my eyesight really goes or my hand coordination just isn't there anymore or something, or I'm just grow, I mean, the older I get, the less energy I have, for a full day of work and stuff. So if I have to like move over to writing, I'm now feeling comfortable about that, which is a good second pride.
And we're back. So we learned a lot about Michael, about his career, about how he had a love of mythological characters from the beginning, and yet made his bones or really came to prominence on a superhero book, which is something he never wanted to be, although it was a skew superhero book and powers. And I'm really looking forward to digging into William of Newbury. It just sounds like another home run from Michael. That's from Dark Horse. As I said, #1 just came out. More issues on the way monthly. So look out for that. Please buy them. Please support Michael's work. It was great of him to come on. Thank you for coming on. And thank you all out there for listening, for viewing, for rating, reviewing, subscribing. Please get the word out about the Dollar Bin Bandits. We want to bring you more guests. We want to bring you more programs, and we're just thrilled that you're here with us. So that'll do it for today's episode. We have another one coming up this week, and we'll see you next issue.